Anthony, welcome. It's really nice to see you online again after seeing you in person not too long ago. Thanks a lot for joining the program and for enabling the course. Do you want to share a few words?
Yeah, just to say a few words about myself before I get started. So I'm Anthony Aguirre. Have a few hats. One is as a theoretical physicist and cosmologist. That's been most of my career, and I'm a professor at UC Santa Cruz still. But I've been pivoting into worrying about technological transformation and how it can go well. So I'm the executive director of the Future of Life Institute, and I also have a hat of the co-founder of Metaculus, which you have, if you haven't seen that prediction platform, log on. There's lots of fun stuff about the future. So this has created a nexus of thinking in me about prediction and storytelling and scenario planning and how we can try to envision better and worse futures and try to steer toward the better ones. So yeah, world building, lots of people have different motivations for world building. I'm just going to tell you what excites me about it. One is that, of course, it just enriches stories. It allows you to inhabit stories and experience them in a way that if you just tell a plot or even some sort of details about a future or past world that a story is taking place in, it doesn't evoke nearly as much. So if you look at these three pictures, and I tell you that one is from the Star Wars world and one is from Star Trek.
Just a brief FYI, we see the presentation view, so we see the slide and the next one, which is interesting because we see what's next. I don't know if you want to change it.
Let me see if I can switch.
It definitely works this way too.
Let me see if this
it's nice for the narrative arc. Oh, yeah, this is great. Super.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So you could, I bet if I took a poll, almost everyone would get which of these is Star Wars and Star Trek and Blade Runner. And why is that? The people behind these movies have spent a tremendous amount of effort building all these like artifacts. There's particular types of robots in each one of them. There's particular, spaceships. You would see immediately that one has TIE fighters and like X-Wing fighters, and another one has those Star Trek-y spaceships. Another one has whatever this weird Blade Runner thing is. You would never mistake, like after a short time, which world you were in. And all that work that's gone into that world building makes it feel evocative. Like you see something come on and you feel like, here I am in the Star Wars universe. I understand that robots aren't that smart and that there's this real mix of old and new kind of architectures on worlds. And even though it's a super advanced technological civilization, there's still people living in poverty for some reason. You know all of that stuff because that's part of the world. And same with Star Trek and same with Blade Runner. It allows it, there's just a depth of experience that comes with all of the work that goes into building that world and that familiarity and that sort of ability to inhabit that world. So that's one of the reasons. Now, why do we care about enriching stories? Stories are fun, they're entertaining, we love them. But I think there's something very deep in us that responds to stories. We connect with them. We think about the world oftentimes in stories rather than in more straightforward, rational ways. Often if you're like making an argument, telling a story about it or turning your argument to a story is much more powerful. I wrote a whole book about physics and cosmology that I wrote as 50 stories to back up my belief in the storytelling mechanism. This is not a book plug, don't buy my book, but had a tremendous amount of fun. I got cheated on the world building because this took place in the early 17th century. So it was the actual world. And I learned a bunch of history. But it's a particular part of our mind, I think, we engage when we go into storytelling rather than just straightforward exposition or building some framework of knowledge or, whatever we might do in a more academic way. The stories engage us in some way. And I wondered a little bit, I've wondered over the years why it's so powerful in us. I looked up the science of storytelling. Is there science behind why we like storytelling so much? I found very disappointing answers. This one, the scientific explanation for our love of stories, because it increases our level of oxytocin. What kind of an explanation is that? So this is the kind of thing that is frustrating. Another one that this was a fun study, but reveals nothing about, I think, why we like storytelling. This was like a AI analysis of the story structures of 2,000 stories or something. And they identified 6 basic structures, and you can see there what those look like. Now, this is a little bit disappointing because if you imagine something happening over time, it can go up or down and then up, or up and then down, or down and then up and then down, or up and then down and then up. So they've just decomposed it that way. That's okay. But this left me a little bit wanting still. But I have my own pet theory, which is that as we were evolving, we had to have some understanding of the world. We had to have an understanding of the world that like how it works and how we can pass that on, to future generations. Stories is a way that we do that, right? Like when you have an explanation of something like mythologically or turned into a story form in earlier years in our species, that's a sort of transmittable explanation for some natural phenomenon. When we have some bit of wisdom that we've accumulated, we often put it in terms of a story of, here was a person who did this thing and this is what happened to them. So you should learn the moral of this story. The moral of the story is a model of reality that you're sharing through that and trying to communicate to another person through this mechanism. So I think we've built this mechanism of encoding models of the world and like social interactions and how the actual world works into stories. Now, those models, of course, in modern times have turned into much more sophisticated ones and evolved into science. And science provides both predictions of things, which are, great, but also explanations for things. So now science has become our go-to method of giving explanations for things in the world and like putting models around things in the world. So I think all these things intertwine in our mind. We always are creating models of reality. That's like most of what our brain does, I think. The historical way of encoding those with stories. Now we have science and like other ways to communicate those models. But I think it's still super powerful in us and engages in a way that lots of other things don't. I think world building is also very close to building scenarios. And that's another thing that our mind is doing all the time and that we want to do explicitly when we're planning, for what futures we actually want. Like all the time we're making choices. The mechanism that if you think about what it means to make a choice, we're thinking about maybe some goals. We're thinking about what the world looks like, in terms of those goals. Our little world, not the whole world, but just the world of our experience. So we've got some sort of desired world that we would really like to be in. We have a choice. We can do A or B. We can imagine, and this is something that's fairly unique to humans as far as we know in terms of creatures, that we can really put our imagination to work thinking through scenario A, if we make choice A, and scenario B, if we make choice B, kind of somewhat explicitly connecting them to the desired world and seeing which one gets us close to the desired world and making that choice. So this is, what we do on a day-to-day basis. This is why prediction is so important, because we need to know if choice A and B, which world are we going to be in? What are those going to look like? How do they compare? But it's also because it's like a thing that we're good at some level. It's also underlies how we should make choices. I think it's a powerful tool. So if we can take that out of just our like small mind doing it on a small decision and bring it to, let's think about more complicated things and let's build the prediction capacity and the scenario building capacity to compare in detail world A and B, maybe we can make some better choices. And so that brings me to the, how we can, so there's a scenario aspect of like how we can make better choices and how we can build different scenarios and try to pursue the scenarios that are better, where the world is going to turn out better. But I think there's also the idea of we need visions for what those worlds are like, both because we respond and everybody responds emotionally and in a more primal way to what those visions are. And we're inspired by visions and made fearful by visions in inappropriate ways. We're now, I think, in a lot of ways, with my future of life hat on and with the existential risk and hope, we're in a much more exaggerated version of this, where there's your solar punk future for whoever was talking about those. That's the Chobani future and the artificial intelligence apocalypse. So these are very interesting times and like very weighty times, I think, actually, in terms of transformative technology. And as Allison mentioned, I think there's a pervasive sense of kind of gloom. There's so many different existential threats and risks and it's absolutely essential that we be cognizant of those and do what we have to do to avoid them. But just avoiding risk is not a recipe for a happy life or civilization, right? We want to have visions of where we actually want to get to. Just like you do in your personal life, I think we want as a society to have some sense of what kind of futures are good. And the more that we can build those visions of potential futures in a deep and rich and inhabitable way, I think the more salience and power they're going to have as we like try to pursue them in the real world or try to make plans to bring some of them into being. So to summarize what I think about this, I think we want to build worlds, with my hats on, because they're inhabitable stories about the future that can warn, inspire, and help us think and plan. in a way that I think nothing else really can. So I'm super excited to see what an awesome group of people here, and I'm super excited to see what all of you come up with. I wish I could just sit in this course for its whole duration, but I probably won't be able to do that. But I will definitely come and peek in whenever I have the opportunity and say hello. And then I think there's some stuff at the end where I get to see some of the worlds that you've built, and I'm really looking forward to that.